At 3:10 in the afternoon, on May 31st, 1889, a wall of water 40 feet high broke loose above the town of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It carried 20 million tons of water. It moved at speeds up to 40 miles an hour. And in less than an hour, it killed over 2,200 people, wiping out 99 entire families so completely that no one was left to identify them. The dam that caused it wasn't a natural disaster waiting to happen. It was privately owned. It was owned by some of the richest, most powerful men in America, and every single one of them walked away without paying a cent. This is the story of the Johnstown Flood. The dam itself was built decades earlier, part of an old canal system that had gone out of use. In 1879, it was bought by a private organization, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Its members included some of the most famous industrialists in American history: Henry Clay Frick, Andrew Mellon, and Andrew Carnegie himself. They wanted a private mountain retreat, complete with a stocked lake for fishing and boating. And to get it, they made a series of changes that turned a functioning dam into a slow-motion catastrophe waiting for the right storm. They lowered the top of the dam by several feet to build a road wide enough for carriages to cross, shaving away the exact margin of safety that would have let it hold back a flood like the one coming. They stretched fish screens across the spillway to keep their stocked base from escaping into the valley below. Those same screens caught every branch and log that came downstream, slowly strangling the one outlet that could have relieved the pressure building behind the dam. And the heavy iron discharge pipes that once let engineers drain the reservoir in an emergency, pipes that could have saved the entire valley, had already been pulled out and sold for scrap years before the club ever bought the property. Nobody replaced them. Nobody seemed to think it mattered. For years, people downstream in Johnstown lived with a quiet, uneasy joke that the dam up at the club's lake was going to break someday, and when it did, God help them all. Engineers who inspected it raised concerns. Newspapers questioned its safety in print. The club's members were warned more than once face to face that what they'd done to that dam was dangerous. They did nothing. Then came the spring of 1889. A storm system dumped as much as 10 inches of rain across the region in barely more than a day. The reservoir rose and rose until at 3:10 in the afternoon on May 31st, the dam gave way completely. Here's the part of this story that makes it even harder to sit with. The people of Johnstown weren't given no warning at all. A club employee, seeing the dam about to fail, sent a rider named John Park racing down the valley on horseback, shouting at anyone who would listen that the dam was breaking. Telegraph operators tried to relay the warning ahead by wire, but this wasn't the first time someone had cried wolf about that dam. It had happened before. False alarms, overcautious warnings that never amounted to anything. Years of "the dam is going to break," with nothing ever happening, had worn the warning down to background noise. So when the real one finally came, on a rainy, ordinary Friday afternoon, a lot of people simply didn't believe it. Some kept working. Some sent their children out to see what the fuss was about. 20 million tons of water surged down the narrow valley at speeds up to 40 miles an hour, forming a wave that reached 60 feet high in the narrowest stretches. It tore through South Fork, Mineral Point, Woodvale, and East Conemaugh, small towns erased almost instantly before slamming into Johnstown itself less than an hour after the dam let go. The wave didn't just flood the town, it picked up entire houses, a moving freight train, miles of barbed wire ripped from a wire factory and carried all of it forward as one crushing, tumbling mass. Survivors described being swept through the streets, still inside their own homes, as the walls came apart around them. One of those survivors was a 6-year-old girl named Gertrude Quinn. She was swept away from her family, carried for nearly a mile atop a floating mattress and a massive wreckage, passing dead bodies and burning debris along the way. A man named Maxwell McCachran waded out into the wreckage and pulled her to safety at the last possible moment, one of the very few pieces of this story with anything close to a happy ending. Much of the debris eventually jammed against the stone bridge at the edge of town, piling into an enormous tangled mass. And then it caught fire. People trapped alive inside that wreckage, unable to free themselves, burned to death within sight of rescuers who could not reach them in time. By the time the water receded, more than 2,200 people were dead. 99 entire families were wiped out completely. It remains one of the deadliest disasters in American history. The response that followed became historic in its own right. Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, personally led one of the organization's first major disaster relief operations here, staying for months to help rebuild. But while the town rebuilt, survivors turned their attention to the men who owned that dam. Lawsuits followed, investigations followed, and again, the courts ruled the disaster an unavoidable act of God, a natural catastrophe nobody could be blamed for. Not one member of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, not Frick, not Mellon, not Carnegie, not anyone else, was ever held legally or financially responsible. Despite the lowered dam, despite the clogged spillway, despite years of warnings ignored, every one of them kept their fortune completely intact. It took decades, but the Johnstown flood eventually changed something. Legal scholars still point to this case as a turning point in American law, a glaring example of how existing negligence law failed ordinary people against the powerful, and a driving force behind the eventual shift towards stricter liability standards that could hold companies and property owners accountable even without proving deliberate intent to cause harm. It's a strange, bitter kind of legacy. The Great Molasses Flood, 30 years later, forced real regulation and real accountability almost immediately. Johnstown forced nothing at the time. Its victims got sympathy, national headlines, and Clara Barton's help rebuilding their town. What they never got was justice. Somewhere above that valley, the lake the wealthy built for their own leisure is gone now. But the case of the dam they broke, and the consequences they never faced, still shapes how the law thinks about responsibility to this day.